Yeah, I'm quite good with an axe, but you're still at risk of missing it. There you go. Axe safety and axe technique. My colleague James Bath is going to be helping me. Hi James. Up until a few days ago I was on crutches. I ripped my calf muscle and it's still recovering. So there's a few things I don't want to do today with the axes. Do as much as I can, and then James can demonstrate some of the techniques. But we want to give you the full range of things that we wanted to show you. First off, let's have a look at a few axes. Very popular size of axe these days. This is a Grand's Force small forest axe. Some other makes, that's a similar one from Halter Force. Halter Force one's got a slightly heavier head, but it's got a very similar length. We would generally refer to this one as a half-length axe. It comes about halfway from my fingertips to my sternum. Quite lightweight head, not particularly heavy, quite a portable axe. It'll go inside a day pack, which is one of the reasons a lot of people like them. It's quite portable, not too heavy, quite wieldy as well. You can use it two-handed, just about long enough for two-handed use, but also we can work with it one-handed, and we can come up, strangle it here, as we might refer to it, strangling the axe, holding it around the throat, and work doing some carving or what have you. So it's a versatile axe. It's very much a general purpose axe. You see that in the way that the head is made. It's not particularly broad. We'll look at some others in a minute that are different. Not particularly broad, concave here, convex there. Pretty much a standard general purpose axe shape. Going up in size, 3/4 length. About 3/4 of the way from my fingertips to my sternum. This is what Grand's Force call a Scandinavian forest axe. It's pretty much a scaled up version of the one I just showed you. Yeah, same sort of shape, handle or helve, very similar head profile, quite thin, quite fine here. Very good general purpose axe for felling, very good for limbing. It's really what it's designed for, taking branches off felled trees. It's very good at that job because it's at the perfect height. If you've got a tree that's come down and you want to take branches off, really, really good length axe for doing that with. This is a good size axe for travel in the boreal forest as well, where you need to be working more on tougher firewood. Wood in the boreal forest tends to be tougher up in the north, slower growing season, tougher wood, tighter grained, a bit more power in your axe. You're also going to need to process more firewood in the winter, so a slightly larger axe for that type of travelling is good, but still you can put it on a toboggan, you can put it on a snow machine, you can put it on a pulk, and it's still eminently portable. It's not too heavy. Going the other way, you've got hatchet size. Yeah, pretty much only 1/4 of the way from there to there. Very light, can only be used one-handed. You can't use this two-handed really. Good for sort of fireside splitting. Again, very portable. And some people prefer these for carving. If you're not quite so strongly built in the wrist and forearm, it can be quite nice, particularly for younger people and for people who are built a bit smaller. A nice one to start with for carving, perhaps. There are some advantages to heavier axes for carving ultimately, but to start off with, some people prefer this. So they're nice little axes, but there is a limitation, not really much use for felling or limbing. Good around camp for small splitting. And again, a very general purpose head on it. Going up in scale, you've got a full-size axe. This is what the Grand's Force call the American felling axe, but it's still of a similar nature to the others that we've looked at. So if we compare this, it's really just scaled up again. Yeah, same kind of shape handle, head proportions are pretty much the same, both in terms of head width and depth as well as the width at the front, but it's a little bit big for splitting kindling. Really, really good for felling, also for heavy sectioning when you're chopping logs up, long logs into sections. It's got a good reach there in terms of splitting stuff, in terms of chopping stuff. One thing I'd encourage you to do as an axe user is try and learn to use the axe as ambidextrously as possible. When you swing an axe, you tend to use the backhand as a guide hand. So you swing, and that's actually doing the guiding at the back. Now I'm right-handed, but I'll use my left hand naturally as the guide hand. So we actually typically all use axes wrong-handed anyway in that sense. The one that's doing most of the work is that one in terms of guiding it to where it wants to be. Yeah, but I'm lifting here. So efficiency with a bigger axe, lifting up here. If I lift from here, there's a lot of strain on my wrist. If I slide my hand forwards, that's easy to lift and throw up in the air. And then I guide with that hand. So the combination, we're going to swing. So actually, given that that's not my dominant hand, it's quite easy for me to learn to use it the other way as well, because that's my dominant hand. So I can lift here and I can swing that way. So it's good to learn how to use it both ways. And I know I'm swinging it towards my leg, but I'm being careful. Yeah. So if you imagine I'm sectioning a log, felled a tree, I want to cut it into sections, I'm standing behind it. Much better than doing this and then getting the other cut by twisting my back. That's not good for my back. See how awkward that looks compared to just swapping my hands and being more straight on. So there, ambidextrous. That's something I would encourage you to learn how to do. Like so. Very good axe for those sorts of jobs. But let's go and have a look at some of the smaller ones first. Before we pick up an axe, we want to think about safety. And one of the reasons I've talked about different size axes is because the safety considerations are slightly different. With the big axe I've just used, if I miss something, if I'm working on a chopping block and I miss and I come towards the ground, there's a chance it's going to hit the ground before it comes anywhere near me. Whereas the very popular axes that probably most of, or many of you have, this sort of size, if I miss something on a chopping block, it's coming straight for my kneecap. So the safety consideration is different. How might I make it a lot safer to use? Kneel down. Yeah, exactly. So let's have a look on here. If I'm working on a stump, I'm splitting something, and I miss, as I say, kneecap. As soon as I kneel down, if I miss, I'm hitting the ground. I don't want to hit the ground with my axe. There's bits of grit and stone and whatnot in there. I'm going to blunten it, but it's better than blunting it on myself. Yeah. Also, if I'm working on splitting something, if I'm standing while I'm standing a piece of wood here, I'm better off putting it there, because then if I miss it, I'm going to hit this bit first rather than standing it here, trying to split it, missing it, and it coming towards me. So we want to think about safety before we even start working on things. Where is the axe going to go next if it doesn't hit the thing I want it to? The answer to that always has to be not me, yeah, when you're using it. The chances of you injuring yourself with an axe are no more than really the chances of you injuring yourself with your knife. The problem is the severity of the injury tends to be much more. Yeah, there's more weight behind it, and these modern made axes are so well made in terms of the quality of the steel, you can get an extremely sharp edge that's still very resilient because the steel is so good. So we tend to have very sharp axes, and we need to be careful that we don't impinge on ourselves with them. So with these short half-length axes, one of the best safety considerations I can give you is if you're working on a low stump or working on a low piece of wood around camp, kneel down rather than, and it's better on your back as well, rather than this kind of stuff that you see people doing. That's really, really important. And you slip over, you're probably filleting one of your buttocks if you land on that, yeah, which is not a good day out. So just be careful when you use that and when you don't. If I'm walking down a slope, I'm going to take that out of there. Yeah, it's not something I'm going to do. I certainly don't want it in there without a mask on. I've seen people do that, yeah, with sharp axes. You're at least going to damage your clothing, if not yourself. Basic safety stuff. So now that we've got some safety principles in place, we can have a look at splitting. We'll look at splitting on the block first. And we'll just start with a small forest axe. So this is not beyond the capability of this small axe that a lot of you carry. Stuck, not doing that. Okay, remember I can lift from there. Lifting from there, very difficult. Lifting from here, onto my shoulder, drop. Because the log's heavier than the axe. So it's a light axe. Again. So your little axe that you carry around with you a lot is very capable. Again, put the thing there, not there. There and off. And then we're back to kind of normal technique. You can still do that if it gets stuck. Like so. Pretty handy, just a little axe. I'd recommend you try it, just don't have anyone sit too close. If you had a wood shed and a log burning stove, that'd be a bit of a pain to use your small forest axe. You might want to invest in something like this, a nice splitting axe. Look at the profile of that head, it's like a wedge. Some of you have probably got these at home for log burning stoves or for fun perhaps, but it's much broader here than this one, for example, which has pretty much the same length handle. Same length handle, very different profile head. Specialist job, big fat head. That does two things. One is it makes it more wedge shaped. The other is it gives it a lot more weight. So I'd struggle, even with my sandy axe, I'd probably struggle with that. Yeah. Whereas if I'm doing that type of wood for my wood shed at home, I want a specialist tool. The other thing that this axe has is protection here. Think about the width of this edge versus the width of this. You get fibres going from one side to the other, which this handle will be going through and coming into contact with. So this stops it getting worn here. Also, sometimes if you get overstrike, it can prevent overstrike damage, but it's mainly to protect it from the fibres in the wood. So James is going to have a go at this. Always size yourself up. Yeah. One of the things that people do is they go, oh, I can hit that, and then they overstrike and miss it. So James is going to make sure that he's sized it for his arms out at length, and then he's going to hit it hard. And it's a tough piece of wood. So what he's going to do then, he's going to attack it on the same line if he can. It's too heavy for that shoulder technique. And he's going to struggle to lift it. Or maybe not. He's a big lad. But he's hitting it, working along that line. And there you go. A nice control there from James. Notice he didn't plough it into the chopping block. He hit it hard enough to split it. That's about safety. It's also about longevity of your axe edge. If you're hitting two pieces of wood for every split, it's going to need sharpening in half the time, isn't it? That's always the sound that you want. So he's bending his knees, he's going down vertically, and he's doing it with control. I might be wanting to make feather sticks, but even standing that up is a bit of a pain. Yeah, it's not a very big target. Yeah, I'm at risk of missing it. Yeah, I'm quite good with an axe, but you're still at risk of missing it. Once I get to that stage, it's not standing up. It's too hard a target. I need another technique. This is a really good one. Just take that piece in your hand, take your small axe, it's perfect for these small forest axes. Hold the axe over it, bring the two up together. Really nice and controlled. Also, you don't get bits flying everywhere, which is a pain because you've got to get up and down all the time. Also, if you've got friends around camp, they don't really appreciate bits of wood coming flying at them, or you end up having to do it miles away from the fire and then having to carry all the wood across. So being able to do something a little smaller scale is quite good. It's less use of energy. You know, James could be just here. Come and sit here, James. Are you feeling comfortable there? Yes, you are. You're feeling comfortable here. We could be having a chat. It's not unsafe. Once it gets to the size where you can hold it with your hand, two things happen. One, you can hold it with your hand. The other one is it actually gets quite difficult to stand it up at that point. So we can go to this technique. So you might have somebody splitting the big stuff and somebody else can be doing the kindling with a smaller axe. That's another option. Depends on what kind of setup you've got. That's not splitting brilliantly. And you can actually split stuff down quite small if it splits. Couple of points on this. One, if I've got something that's triangular, rather than trying to balance it there, which is hard, I work on the flat side. One thing to remember. The other thing you'll notice is what I'm doing with the axe and the wood. Okay, that axe is in the log there. Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't be. As a kind of routine, what I don't want to be doing is stopping and thinking, is that in there or not? I just want a process that works every time. If I try and split this piece of wood by turning the axe, what's going to happen? I'm going to try and turn the whole stump, which A is going to be ineffective and B isn't going to be good for my axe. Yeah, putting a lot of strain, putting a lot of leverage on where the handle meets the head. What's much easier is just do that. That's what splits it. Even, okay, that's in, doesn't matter. That's not in, but even so, I'm just always going to move the wood and keep the axe still. Then regardless of whether it's embedded in everything or not, I'm not going to be putting strain on the eye. That's going to lengthen the life of your axe, and it's also going to make you more efficient. These are little things that make a big difference over time. So it's quick and it's efficient. You might be thinking, well, I don't always have a chopping block, and we often don't in camp. I can use the same technique. I might just have a bit of a log. Could be just kicking around the woods. It might even be a bit of what you've sawn this off. Just something low. Notice that I'm striking directly under where the cutting edge of the axe is. I'm not striking there. The wood could sometimes break, but also it's not so efficient. Also, the shape of these axes is great because you've got this bit of the knob or the swell or the fawn's foot at the end here, as we call it on the handle, and I can put my hand in there and I'm not going to wrap my knuckles. If it's a shorter bit of wood, just be careful you're not smacking your knuckles together. You might want to hold your fingers around it. But either way, you're knocking it directly over that, not past it. So set yourself up. And again, it's the same technique. That we were using before. I've used this technique in camp a lot for producing platforms to light fires on, for splitting stuff to make feather sticks with, for small fuel, for slightly larger fuel, and it's quick and efficient. You can have your tarp up, you can have your fire, you can have a small space to work under even in the pouring rain. You don't have to be out doing dynamic techniques on a stump somewhere. You can be quite close to the fire, just stacking the wood ready to go on the fire. So I like it for that reason. This is also good in places when you might be working on snow. Winter camping, yeah, in a tent teepee or a snow trekker tent. One of your options is to dig down to the ground and put the tent there, but you never know what's going to be underneath. It tends to be uneven, and also basically created a cold well. What's better is to trample the snow with your, say, snowshoes on, create a platform, let it freeze. It will do quite quickly in cold environments. Then you put your tent on top, you dig a cold well inside, you have your stove in there, and you're going to need plenty of fuel. Also have an area on the platform outside the tent where you can process your firewood close to the entrance. So the entrance might be over there, I can process the wood and I can take it over to the guys in the tent and they can stack it by the stove. Just one bit of log on some compacted snow works extremely well. Yeah, I use exactly the same technique at -20 with gloves on, and again it's safe. If I'm doing big dynamic techniques, I'm more likely to injure myself, particularly if I'm wearing gloves. Notice I don't wear, a lot of people will wear work gloves these days. I would recommend refinishing your axe handle, and I'll talk more about that towards the end of the talk, and if I forget, please remind me. Refinishing your axe handle so it's nice and smooth, and also just letting your hands toughen up a little bit, yeah, because then you've got more sensitivity in using the axe and you're less likely to injure yourself again. So this is good. Also on rock, a lot of canoe trips in Canada, in the Canadian Shield, which is classic canoe country, the camping areas next to the river, there's no topsoil on them, they're solid rock. It's ancient bedrock. That's the reason why you've got that undulating landscape where the dips are filled with rivers and lakes, and then you've got the trees on the bumps, but there isn't a lot of topsoil because it was all scoured off in the last ice age, and you're very close to that ancient bedrock. So you don't want to be smacking your axe down onto that rock because you're going to have a long job of resharpening it. So just putting a log down so that you can split. Even if you'd normally stand it on end and think, well, I can split it, you don't want to risk hitting onto the rock, so you're going to work directly down onto it, even working on rock. It's a fantastic versatile technique for being in camp. And as I say, always works well with small stuff that you can hold in your hand. When it gets to bigger stuff that you can't hold in your hand, we might need some more dynamic techniques. And if we've got a chopping block, we can chop down onto the block, as you've seen, even with big stuff. And I'm going to need to borrow James again for this one. But if we don't have a chopping block, we're going to need to work a little bit differently. Also, if we're working on snow, even if we've got a nice compacted area, we don't want to be knocking down into it because we'll just punch through that crust and then we're down into soft snow. So we want to be working horizontally if we can, rather than putting force down. If we're working on rock again, we don't want to be working down onto the rock where we risk hitting the rock with our axe. So again, a horizontal technique might be more appropriate. So we're going to attempt to illustrate that here on grass. We've got a couple of slightly larger bits, a bit too big to hold in the hand, one-handed, and use that technique. James is very stubborn as well, I should warn you. You've got homes to go to. There we go. There's a knot in the middle of that. So part of it's about material selection, isn't it? Yeah, you can smash stuff with a big axe, but maybe you need to be a little more careful with the material selection. And even so, we thought, that sweet chestnut, normally sweet chestnut's quite easy to split. Ash is normally quite easy to split. Birch, as long as it's not too knotty, is normally relatively easy to split, but sometimes it isn't. And you've got this interplay between, you've got to hit it hard and fast. Yeah, if you hit it too slow, you don't shock the wood enough. But if the wood's too light, it just moves off very quickly and you don't get the penetration into the wood. So there's a kind of optimal size for doing it. But then once you get it down to a size where you can hold it again, you can go back to the previous technique. You can hit stuff smaller with the technique that James has just shown, but again, you get an increasingly hard target to strike. So as I say, some people for carving quite like a small piece, a small axe. So we'll have a look at using this axe. A couple of general points, just safety again. If we're going to be working on this, whether we're making a spatula, a spoon, a big tent peg for a larger tent or what have you, same kind of rules apply. Keep your fingers out of the way. It's an obvious point. Don't be kind of holding things down here. And also think about how high you're raising the axe. Yeah, if I'm raising the axe above my fingers the whole time, if I get distracted or I slip, if that slips out of the way or what have you, I increase the chances of hitting my own hand. Whereas if I'm working here and I'm never lifting the axe above this hand, then I'm less likely to hurt myself. Also, the axe naturally wants to sit in that orientation because that's where the centre of gravity takes it. So if I'm constantly trying to chop in at an angle, again, that's going to strain my wrist, and that's important for beginners, but it's also important for more advanced people when they're using heavier axes. So if I want to get an angle, I'm better to move the piece around. So rather than trying to chop in like that, turn the wood. Again, obvious when you see it, but I see a lot of people work with axes like this here, and we can work more vertically. This axe is a bit light for me, but you can strangle it. You can do quite nice fine work. You can hold it a bit further up, bigger chop. Notice also the position of my leg. If I miss, I'm going through that way. I'm not doing this sort of thing where if I miss, I'm into my kneecap. Yeah, I do it naturally now, but to start off with, you need to be conscious about these things. Also, you get a more efficient movement. You're not all punched up in here. So stand to the side, you can look over what you're doing, and you can work on whatever you're doing. For carving though, if you get into your carving, they tend to have longer blades, particularly those that are designed for greenwood carving, and the blades are curved. They're more curved than your general purpose axe. Okay, so longer blade, more curved, and it's also a heavier head. You've still got good contact between the handle and the head, but a deeper cut in here so I can strangle it right in there if I want to. So again, I can work on this here. So let's have a look. Again, placing the piece I'm working on the far side of the block.
So even if it's like 1 in 10,000 times going wrong,
I'm just going to get the back off this.
then you've got to focus on making curly shaving ones.
So heavier axe, got more weight behind it now. Again, I can move the piece around. Again, I've got that follow through. I'm not lifting it above my hand. Notice I'm slicing as well. That's why we've got this nice curved blade. We can slice with it. I heard there was some sort of zombie thing going on, so I thought I'd arm myself up. Also, there might be some vampires around. So if I want to do finer stuff, I can strangle it up. Saws are very good at going across the grain. I can't make a cut like that on the end of these logs with an axe. Not in a million years. Yeah. If I want to cut through a log, like I was saying before, if I want to section a tree, I've got to open up a V-cut, normally about the width of the diameter of the tree. I'm wasting a lot of wood and I end up with something at the end that looks like a beaver's chewed it down. That's not going to sit on top of a chopping block very well. Yeah. If it's got a V on the end, it won't sit on here. And even if it's got a V on one end, you saw that James was struggling with this one that's not sawn, not struggling, but it's just harder. If something's not square on the front, it's harder to hit to get the axe to go into it. So we like squared off edges for slitting and for various jobs. So having a saw makes a huge difference. And if you're carrying an axe, you want a larger saw than your Laplander a lot of the time. Yeah. That's great for having around camp. We've always got one of those around camp. They're inexpensive, they're robust, it's easy to get the replacement blade for them, but they're awkward to pack. Not so bad in a Land Rover, awkward in your backpack, awkward in a portage pack on a canoe trip, awkward in a toboggan. even on a snowshoeing trip where you're hauling your gear. Much better to have something folding. And there are some nice folding metal frame saws. I don't like them for the cold because they're metal. Steel is about 1,000 times more conductive than air. Aluminium is about 6,000 times more conductive than air. 6 times that of steel. Even with gloves on, your hands are going to get colder. This is a Swedish saw. At least they have some sensibility about using this in the cold. It's got a plastic handle. Plastic is more insulative than metal. And it's also got a nice hand guard on it. But it's still made of metal and it's still awkward to pack. So the traditional wooden saws are nice for a number of reasons. One is they pack down quite small. And secondly is that they're made of wood, and wood isn't particularly thermally conductive. So on expeditions, I like to take something like this. This is one that one of the guys who works with has made. He made a number of them for us and for Frontiers trips, so some of you might have used these before. And you can buy similar ones made by other people. There's just a windlass at the top. And it's the same size blade as in the orange Barco saw. So for me, that's kind of like the axe and saw equivalent of my belt knife and my Laplander. Okay, it's the next scale up. These are on my person. These are great to have a bigger job. I can now do much more. I can build a cabin if I wanted to. Really cabin. Yeah, I can process a lot more firewood. I can fell trees, I can saw things off the length of my stove, etc, etc, etc. So all of our cutting tools, our primary cutting tools, are more powerful if we pair them with a saw. So I'd recommend that generally. In terms of looking after these things, they've all got wooden handles. They don't really appreciate getting very wet, wood soaking into them. And so how do we look after them? I'll tell you a funny story. I stayed with a friend of mine in Canada, and I went back again the next year, and to thank him for his hospitality, I took him a Grant's small forest axe. And he gratefully received this, put it into his wilderness camp. I went back the following year with some supplies. We did a canoe trip there. We went to stay with him for a number of days out at his wilderness camp, and the axe that I'd given him was in a stump outside, and this was bleached. All the varnish, well not the varnish, but the beeswax and the linseed oil coating that we come with had gone. It was bare wood, it had gone grey, it was cracked, and that was a year. Yeah, and I put my axe next to it, which was more than 10 years old and had done multiple trips and been outdoors in -30 and fallen in rivers on canoe capsizes and all sorts of things. Still in pristine condition. In fact, the handle is in better condition than when I bought it. Because what I like to do with the axes is I strip them completely off. So if I pass that, I'm not picking on Hultafors, but if I pass that around, please give me it back. Pass it around. It's quite rough. Then by comparison, I'll pass that one around. And they'd be similar to that if you didn't refinish them. Put some linseed oil on. Boiled linseed oil. Brush it on, wipe off the excess, let it dry. Has to be boiled linseed oil, not raw linseed oil. Just over the existing finish that it comes with. If you want to do a real proper job, scrape off any remnants of the linseed oil and beeswax finish that it comes with, back down to the raw wood. Then you want to take the warm water, pour it on the handle. The grain will swell, like it will do with a sweaty hand. Grain starts to raise in places. You then dry that off. You could do it over a flame, just a gentle heat, dries off. Then you take a furniture scraper or the edge of a standing knife blade, scrape off that raised grain. Do it again, scrape off the raised grain. Then you get some boiled linseed oil. You heat it up so it's a little bit more, little less viscous. Take some really fine wire wool, 5/0, and then you work that linseed oil into that raw wood. And you wipe off the excess, put some more on, rub it in with a with the wire wool, take it off, do it again, take it off, let it dry overnight. Then you put some more on the next day, you wipe it off, don't use the wire wool the next day, then the next day you put some more on, wipe off the excess, let it dry. Do that for a week. You're building up these layers of finish, and you end up with a finish like the one on that Scandi axe that's going around. Now, that's more than 10 years old. I got that axe in 2003. 15 years old now, that axe. It's got a bit of damage. Oh dear. It's got a bit of damage on the original handle, but the finish is still good. And I just give it a coat every year now, and it lasts so much longer. So I thoroughly recommend refinishing your axe handle if you get the opportunity. I'd also recommend getting a better leather mask than the ones that they typically come with, like the ones that come from Beneath the Stars who are here at the moment. And then you've got a really top-notch package. Really good axe head, really well finished handle, really good mask, all the components are in really good condition. In terms of sharpening, for our knives at home we might have all sorts of waterstones and different grades, but really for your axe, whether you're at home or in the field, just use an axe stone. The Grand's Force ones are as good as anything. Or you could take a combination of waterstone, saw that in half and use that. The reason you want a short stone on your axe, I will show you, rather than something that's longer. I'm just going to pick up something that looks vaguely sharpening stone like. That's quite flat. Say I want to sharpen my axe. If I use a bench stone,
you see that I put that space between my thumb?
if I am sitting down, I want to sharpen my axe.
That's basically where I can balance.
I've got a bench stone, an oil stone or a water stone. I can have it on my bench and I can work the axe on there. That's one option, but there is a limitation. Equally, I can take the stone, particularly with the bigger axes, it's easier. I can take the stone and work the stone onto the axe, but there's still a limitation. The limitation is that this has a convex bevel, which means that you can't just keep the bevel angle, the sharpening angle the same at the end, because otherwise you end up with a secondary bevel. You've got to take metal off the whole thing and it's a curved surface, which means you need to change the angle that the sharpening stone is working at so that it comes into contact at a different point. The problem with longer stones is that you can't get beyond that angle where it comes into contact with the side, with the cheek of the head. So you end up having to use only part of it anyway so that you get the full range of angles. So why have all the rest of this? Just have a short stone. So either a normal bench stone sawn in half, or just use a small stone, and then you can work on the bevel and get all the angles you want without being impinged by the cheek. So you do that at home anyway, and that's great for the trail. So people ask me about what do I do to sharpen my axe. I just largely use an axe stone, coarse on one side, finer on the other. If you want to get fancy, you can make a paddle strop or buy a paddle strop, bit of leather on a piece of MDF or board, bit of metal polish like T-cut or Autosol, something like that, and you can hone it, strop it rather with that. Sometimes I just give it a little tickle on the edge with a ceramic rod just to give it a bit more bite, depending on what I'm doing with a general purpose axe. Very, very tiny secondary bevel just gives it a bit more purchase in the wood. And then I'll put some oil on the axe head after I finish sharpening so that it's protected from moisture, even from condensation, and then the mask goes back on. And that's all I really do to sharpen and look after the axe. A bit of oil on the head, general purpose, like 3-in-1 is fine. Ballistol, if any of you use Ballistol on your tools, that's good stuff. If you want to get fancy again and go all samurai, you could use a bit of camellia oil. Yeah, but in the fields, just a bit of general purpose oil, Ballistol or something like that. Every now and again, a bit more linseed oil on the handle. And in terms of looking after the mask, a little bit of shoe polish, that's all you need. Something that doesn't soften. You don't want to be putting dubbing and saddle impregnation stuff on there or anything like that that's going to soften the leather. Just a bit of shoe polish will do fine and keep the moisture out, and that will mean that you can look after your axes really, really well, and they'll always be in good condition for using them. So that brings me to the end. I have been talking for an hour, would you believe? Be safe. Safety is always the first thing. Think about where the axe is going next. Make sure it's not you. Build up your confidence. Always have a large dressing, a wound dressing in your pocket. Just makes sense. If I'm out in the woods on my own and I'm using an axe, I will have a wound dressing, like a military dressing on me, and I'll also have a little cap tourniquet on me. Combat application tourniquet. Yeah. If you don't know how to use those, I'd do a first aid course. Anybody spending time in the outdoors, it's worth doing first aid course for your own sake and for other people. But have something on you to deal with any nasty cuts. But the best thing to do in the first place is don't get them. Thanks to James as well.